It's because the concept of S&OP has been massively distorted from what Dick Ling originally intended in 1988. There's a lot of people that like to credit Ollie White for it, but Ollie never heard the term. Dick, as the legacy story goes, is he was teaching one of the executive classes, and this guy came up to me and says, "What really are you talking about?" And Dick said, "Well, we're talking about how to manage the business. How do you manage sales and operations?" And the guy looked at her and he says, "So really what you're talking about is sales and operations planning." And Dick said, "Well, yeah, that's what we're talking about." And he said, "Why don't you call it that?" And that's where it came from. So the idea then was that he spent a lifetime is working on this concept of management's handle on the business. How does management understand choices that they can make strategically and consequences that are the result operationally?
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never-Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Carol Ptak. And now, Carol is a very special lady because she's got a lifetime in supply chain, going from the shop floor as a young lass to the president of APICS, which is now as ASCM. And she has built software solutions and is now part of the lead of the Demand Driven Institute. Carol, it's such a pleasure to bring your experience as a practitioner, an educator, a leader in supply chain to the show today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sean. I really appreciate the invitation.
There's a couple of things that we talked about around how and why demand driven is so important. And there was a quote of roughly right is better than precisely wrong. And it just feels like it really hits home, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And that was John Maynard Keynes. And what I've seen in a lifetime of trying to work with computers and trying to figure out a better planning methodology is we just kept thinking that if computers could just get faster, that we would have a better answer. And what we discovered is computers got faster, the answer got worse. And that we started to get more and more system nervousness. When I first joined Apex 40 some odd years ago, the very first dinner meeting, that's when we had dinner meetings, it was all about system nervousness and and we thought, which computers will just get faster, we'll be okay. And it didn't.
The answer that took 12 hours in 2 minutes and it'll be better.
Right. Well, when I implemented MRP on a PC, it actually took 8 days on an 8088 computer. So yeah, we really thought, boy, if we could just get it down to, it could calculate overnight. Because we taught things like net change and a regen run, which we don't even teach anymore because we have the computing power, but we still haven't solved the basic problem, which is the same as MRP's basic strength, is that everything is dependent.
Yeah. And that gets into something that we had the pleasure of connecting with your colleague the other day about the dependent explosions and how that is so critical. Now, that, I think, also brings us into this concept of what was the original intent of S&OP? Because I think we talked the other day about what demand-driven really meant, where it came from. And S&OP, Sales and Operations Plan, is another one of those terms that I think is thrown around and abused. Can you share with us what the original intent of it was and how that's really critical to what management manages?
Absolutely. I mean, Laura Cesari has done some great research. She's a wonderful researcher. And her latest research is on the disillusionment and the ineffectivity of S&OP. And it's because the concept of S&OP has been massively distorted from what Dick Ling originally intended in 1988. There's a lot of people that like to credit Ollie White for it, but Ollie never heard the term. Dick, as the legacy story goes, is he was teaching one of the executive classes, and this guy came up to me and says, "What really are you talking about?" And Dick said, "Well, we're talking about how to manage the business. How do you manage sales and operations?" And the guy looked at her and he says, "So really what you're talking about is sales and operations planning." And Dick said, "Well, yeah, that's what we're talking about." And he said, "Why don't you call it that?" And that's where it came from. So the idea then was that he spent a lifetime is working on this concept of management's handle on the business. How does management understand choices that they can make strategically and consequences that are the result operationally? Because really, when you run a business, you only have one source of sustainable competitive advantage, and that is to exploit your unique operational capability that provides value to a customer and a profit to yourself. That's it. There's a lot of real short-term things that you can do, but when you really get to the nitty-gritty of running a manufacturing operation, that's it. What is it that makes you unique? And it's sort of like our DNA with the monkey. It's about 99% the same. It's the 1% that makes you different is what gives you your competitive advantage. And how do you exploit operational capability?
Yeah, 100%. And that gets into how flow really drives return on investment. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about flow, it's an old concept. When you go back to the earliest days of lean, the reason why so many of our examples go back to ships is because lean goes back to ancient Phoenicia, because the Phoenicians went from trading vessels to warships because, of course, they were quite wealthy. And when you're wealthy, everybody tries to take it away from you. And so much of it has to do with water. And then it went from, Italy, of course, to UK and out of France. And of course, it came over here. And it's a great story on how lean evolved. But when we really think about it, it really is all about flow. Because as you get better flow, what happens? Well, then you get better customer service. If you have better customer service and things are flowing better, well, then your costs are down. Why? Well, because you're not stumbling over the rocks that are in your way. So you're providing better service with your customers at a lower cost to yourself. And doesn't that sound like net profit? Well, then when you look at increasing your net profit and keeping your investment the same, well, what does that mean? Well, now your net profit divided by investment goes up. And by the way, that is the formula, always has been, for return on investment. And ROI really is the objective of every for-profit company around the world.
It's so simple when you think about it, because the short-term view is often too short of a view to really get that return. But that longer-term view of the things that you do consistently over time and the things that you stop doing because those habits that maybe somebody thought they served you, like saying, hey, if you order 3 times a year and you give us an order of 100,000 units, we'll give you a discount. As opposed to, hey, we'll give you that discount if you order, this many thousand units every month, and we get to ship them to you in a nice flow. That contrast, I think, is often lost on folks that haven't yet had the opportunity to appreciate how and why flow is so critical, and why that fluid, that consistent, that smoothness that we talk about wanting is elusive, and that bullwhip effect that gets in the way.
Yeah, and you think about some of those short-term decisions. And I was a buyer. I did procurement at one company, and my boss promised me a really good dinner out in Rochester, New York, if I could get so much in PPV. Well, I ended up dropping more purchase price variance than the company had in profitability. But one of the buys that I did was exactly that. I bought like 4 years supply. And just about the time I got this product in with, 3 or 4 years supply, I got a great price on it. And what happened is a month later, the engineers wanted to change it. And now we were hamstrung because we couldn't react to the needs of the market because we had all this inventory. So, when we all of a sudden had a flood in the warehouse, it was amazing how that stuff sort of found its way into the water, so we could finally get rid of it. But boy, we got a good deal on it, and this is where we get into this idea of how do we allocate overhead? Well, overhead for an operational or a tactical decision is totally irrelevant. And even considering it distorts information. And as you distort relevant information, then you impede flow. And when you impede flow, you destroy ROI.
And that, like, simple decisions around how return on investment, how way that you look at your costs and the way that you apportion those across things. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And suddenly something can go from looking horrifically unprofitable to looking amazing. And that shift in the way that you look at that has opportunity to really break things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I worked at an aerospace company where we used to produce just interiors for the aircraft. We were a composite company. And then we got into structural composites. And then, of course, when you get into structural composites, you got to bring in a lot more engineers. But they took the engineering costs and spread it over labor hours, which, by the way, was about 6% of our total cost of goods sold. But that's how they spread the cost of the engineers. And what ended up happening, it almost bankrupted the company because of the increased cost of that peanut butter spread of the engineering time on all hours, we had a competitor down the road that did a job below what our costs were, not understanding that a big part of that cost was overhead cost. And we lost our cash cow. I mean, we had ourselves a grand barbecue, as we ate the cash cow and then struggled with the structural composites for years. And the margins on them just weren't there until somebody said, hey, you know what? What if we allocated the cost of the engineering to structures and that the other stuff, that runs by itself, just, we don't burden with all that overhead. And boy, that was a real eye opener.
That ability to go and take those overhead costs and apportion them the right way is probably one of the things that has sunk more firms and more potentially profitable products out there, or torpedoed companies' ability to understand that price volume trade-off. And when you fix things the wrong way and your volume changes, well, that pricing and your costing along with it needs to be able to move and respond.
Price should never be a function of cost anyway. I mean, that's ridiculous. Price should never be a function of cost.
The number of systems that are structurally force that connection are many. Like the number of systems that force pricing or derive pricing off of cost, or the number of accountants that try to go in and force those sales guys or those procurement guys that better get those costs in line. Feeling like they're adding value.
I was at one company where we were talking about GDMRP and the how it impacts capacity because you've got a constraint. Well, and I said, whatever you do, and you've got something that's going across a limited resource, you don't want to do a promotion. And I had the chief marketing officer go, oops. And go, what do you mean? Oh, we were going to do a buy three, get one free promotion. I said, you can't even produce the products that you're getting orders for today. Why would you want to give away 25% of your product? Because you're capacity constrained. You can't get this stuff out. And, and I got this look like, well, we never considered capacity. Well, you really kind of need to, because you got to look at that cash contribution per unit of that constrained capacity and what's giving you the best utilization. And I've talked to so many executives that want to do trim the product line. I love it. Rationalize the product line. Let's see where you get the cost from. And they go, well, the cost of the Atom Masters. Like, no, because that's got labor and overhead rolled in. You just take your variable cost and then you look at your constrained capacity and then figure out, is this thing a $200 profit? This thing might be a $100 profit. Well, is this one really better than this? And you say, no, because this takes me 10 hours to produce and I can produce this one in an hour. So this one, I'm getting $20 per hour of my constrained capacity. And this one, I'm getting $100 per hour of my constrained capacity. You best build this one and you're going to do a lot better. And, simply by changing your mind, it has nothing to do with software, it's nothing to do with hardware, nothing to do with consulting services. We call it thoughtware, the stuff that runs between your ears. By relooking at that and considering flow and saying, where is my constrained capacity and how do I maximize that contribution margin per unit of constrained capacity? You'll always maximize your margin. And I've seen companies double and triple their ROI when they start to focus on that.
The focus on the constraint. I think the number of people that talk about constraints, and sometimes I know that folks like you and I will have the feeling like these aren't the droids you're looking for. That's not what constraints mean. Can you break it down for everybody of like in the 101 view, what does a constraint mean to you and how can folks really take that constraint and conceptualize or think about it the right way? Because I think the term gets thrown around way too much without really appreciating what it means.
We use constraint and bottleneck interchangeably. Now, there's some folks that like to draw a distinction between those two. But a constraint is whatever is limiting your business from maximizing its volume. All right. Because if you look at what is the market out there for you, and then it was what is limiting. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is when somebody says, oh, well, you know what? One constraint. And this is where the massive distortion of Dr. Goldratt's work came with the APS systems. They said, oh, well, we can optimize not only a single constraint, but thousands of constraints at the same time. Any system only has one constraint, not multiples. If you have multiples, you better have multiple systems. Or my favorite is what I call the bouncing bottleneck. The bottleneck moves from here, then it moves to here, then it moves to here, then it moves to here. That is you have picked up your pistol, you've cocked it, you pointed at your foot and pulled your own trigger. Because that's just what you've done. Is because if you got a bouncing bottleneck, there's only two ways that happens. One is that your product volumes have changed so dramatically to change the schedule in the plant, which I've never seen in my entire career. Or two is you're trying to be so efficient and you're producing in large lots. And to use a really graphic example, it's like watching a rabbit going through a boa constrictor. As you watch this thing just get pushed through and disrupts its way all the way through. It's not good for the boa constrictor either.
Yeah. And no, I love it. Carol, I know that the concepts here around pricing, what S&OP was really intended to be, pricing, the focus on flow, the focus on ROI, and being able to consider overhead costs very carefully relative to what product lines are really profitable. And when people are looking to mitigate or optimize costs, or people are looking to set pricing, and then again, when you've got a constrained production capacity, being really considerate about which constraints you involve in those marketing decisions of a 3-for-1 discount.
Well, and you really think of there's three time zones. There's the operational range, there's the tactical range, and there's the strategic range. Overhead only becomes relevant in the strategic range because this is a funny story. And if I ask anybody around the world, how far out should S&OP look? The answer I always get is 15 to 18 months. Now, do you know how we got the width of a train track in the United States? It's one of the longest lived specifications ever in the history of the world. The width of the train came the width of the Roman. So it was to the butt end of two Roman horses, right? When Dick wrote the book, Orchestrating Success, he put a figure in the book, and all that he could fit on the page was 15 to 18 months. And it's become the standard. The reality is your S&OP process should look out as far as you need to where all your costs, all your overhead becomes variable, which is much further out than 15 to 18 months for most companies. Where can you acquire something, sell something? Where can you add capacity? You can't add capacity within your tactical relevant range. You're not going to go out and buy a factory within your tactical relevant range, which is typically your cumulative lead time. You can't react that fast. Most certainly not within operations. So overhead has absolutely no position for the discussion in either operational or tactical. It only has a conversation as you get to the strategic relevant range.
That center, and then mix in that price volume trade-off of if you're starting to think about things that would reduce your volume within that, it's only going to make the problem worse. It's like a bunch of accountants sitting around, well, let's close this factory, we'll save a lot of money. And somebody finally speaks up and says, well, let's close all the factories, we'll save lots of money.
Yeah, and that's funny because I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of CFOs, and they said, well, we care about cost. I said, I do too. And I said, if your objective is to reduce your cost, give me your company for 6 months and I'll drive your cost to zero. Nobody's ever taken me up on that. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it would be very easy to do.
Funny? Yeah. Carol, this has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope everybody has a chance to check out the Demand Driven Institute to benefit from Carol and her team's experience, wisdom, and opportunity to help you massively transform the way that you think about your supply chain.
When you go to the website, demanddriveninstitute.com, look for the case studies tab. Look for an industry that's close to yours. Go listen to somebody that is just like you, because all the case studies are actually presented by the practitioners. We don't allow the software companies or the consultants to present. It is about the practitioners, and they are unvarnished, unfiltered, unedited presentations about what they did, why they did it, what did they learn, what was the good news, what was the bad news, and what do they plan going forward. And I think that's the best education of everything is look at what's possible. Look what's possible to your return on investment. So, Sean, I want to thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Super, super fun. Yeah. And when you look at those, remember, those are companies like you. And that is going to change the way you look at what good looks like.
Absolutely.
And that's powerful stuff. Because the way that most companies have been doing it so far, it's just what you're doing. It's not what good looks like, because you got to look up and look out and find some better examples. Carol, thank you again. And thanks everybody for watching another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain.
Thanks, Sean.